the object level, that's the simple line structural description. That's a quick scheme, okay? Event level, object level. So the object level is the first level of abstraction from what is going on, right? The event level is what is going on. And the object level is the first level of abstraction from what is going on. Krzyzewski, when he talks about abstraction, emphasizes that it means leaving out. So if we abstract from what is going on, that means we leave out much, most of what is going on. But equally important is that it's not only a matter of leaving out, it's also a matter of transforming. What is going on is transformed by the brain nervous system into something quite different. So you could call this first level abstraction the level of neurological transform. So if we stay with this sort of unfortunate example of the sky being blue, up here we have whatever is going on there, which I won't bother to characterize right now. And here we have the transformation of that into a sensation of blueness by the human visual nervous system or any other nervous system which is capable of experiencing blue or something. So that's the neurological transform. Here's another example I used before. If our science tells us that what is going on here is air pressure waves, then at the object level, this is transformed as sound. Now, at the event level, air pressure waves. At the object level, the hearing of sound. That's a transform. It's not just a matter of leaving out much of what is going on. It's a matter of actual transformation of what's going on. What's going on at the object level is not merely a partial representation or a partial copy of what's going on. This is not a copy of this, and this is not a copy of this. It's not simply that the object level is a partial copy. It's not at all a matter of copying or partial copying. It's a matter of transformation. An air pressure wave is nothing like a sound. They're two completely different things. So the sound doesn't leave out so much as it transforms. And here at the label level, we have a further level of abstraction. The object level abstracts from what is going on. It leaves out and transforms. And the label levels also leave out and transform. Here we have a linguistic transform. So here we have, according to our science, air pressure waves. Here we have the sensory experience of sound. And here we have the word sound. Now the word sound is not a copy of the experience of sound. It's a total transformation from a sensory experience into language. Nevertheless, Krzyzewski does emphasize leaving out, and that's an important aspect of abstraction, which he pictures, as you may recall, by putting all those little holes in the event level and leaving some arrows go nowhere and some arrows go into the object level. So much of what is going on is left out. Thus, a key principle of general semantics becomes what Krzyzewski calls non-allness. Thus, again, we come upon the etc. Something is always left out. There's always more than has been covered by any map. More than has been related to by any map. I'll put it yet another way. The map doesn't merely contain a smaller number of characteristics doesn't contain any of the characteristics that are in the territory. If the object level is a map of the event level, and if the label level is a map of the object level, so here we have a map of a territory, and all we have are maps, because we never have anything like direct access to the event level. The map is always a partial map, in the sense that it leaves out a lot, but it's also qualitatively entirely different than the territory that it maps. In the same way that if you think of an actual map of Canada, a map of Canada doesn't only leave out much of what is to be found in the territory of Canada, it's also a piece of paper, which is something very different from Canada. So, the object level, Krasicki tells us, is where we live. It's, we could call it a life world, or the life world. It's where we experience our life. And one of the major problems with the Aristotelian orientation, which identifies label and object, is that it ignores, leaves out, and also suppresses and distorts, and as I said before, damages much of the pre-verbal meaning and sensory richness of human existence. And I did say pre-verbal meaning. I'll come back to that, perhaps for some of you probably not know pre-verbal meaning later. Which brings us to the label levels, once again, which is another level, or perhaps even a set of levels of abstraction. What we say about our experience, what we say about what we say, language, concepts, categories, generalizations. Now, in some presentations of the structure differential, you see it put this way. Label level 1 would be description, and label level 2 might be inference, and label number 3 might be inference from inference, and so on all the way up to the highest label level, which is number 3. I should keep erasing this so it doesn't get too messy. Increasingly higher order classifications or conceptualizations or theorizations, which leave out more and more of things going on at the object level, while also subsuming all preceding levels into the higher ones. So the highest label level not only leaves out much of what has come before, but also subsumes, or at least claims to subsume, purports to subsume that which is going forward. Which means that more and more of the particularity, or singularity, or uniqueness, or richness, which characterizes the object level, is left out and subsumed in more and more general and inclusive levels of classification. Until at the very top, for example, we might get to something like that. Actually, one of the first discussions of something like this can be found in Plato's Symposium. So for those who know will appreciate, and for those who don't, it doesn't matter. Or look at it this way, or here's another example. At label level 1, Fido, which is of course Krasicki's general term for animals. We'll use it as just referring to a single dog. Fido. I've never known a dog named Fido. And I'm sure that he existed. At the next higher level, poodles. At the next higher level, dogs. At the next higher level, canines. At the next higher level, mammals. At the next higher level, living beings. At the highest level, life, or the living. Increasingly general levels of abstraction. Here's a little example from Etc., the Journal of the Movement, June 1964. Some reader submits a little poem. Actually, his name is Craig Abbott. Submitted by Craig Abbott. They were just sitting around sewing their toes together. So here is what is going on. Here's the object level. Here's an attempted description of a happening at the object level, or an experience at the object level. They were sitting around sewing their toes together. Surgery, I said. Homemaking, they said. Masochism, I said. Notice I put all those at the same level. Those are alternative formulations at the label level 2. Toe sewing, they said. Toe sewing, I agreed. In other words, there's the implication here, which is perhaps problematic, that it's a lot easier to agree. It's a lot easier for human beings to agree on descriptions that are close to the object level than on inferences from those descriptions. We could say that here at label level 1 we have ordinary descriptive English. I already mentioned something nice maybe between label level 1 and label level 0, as close as you can possibly get to the object level without, of course, ever reaching it, because no language ever does reach it. What you would call sensory grounded language, or sensory grounded description, SGL. Little Joey sitting in the crib, and what was the name of the author who's writing about Little Joey?
Stern,
Daniel Stern. The language that he chose to describe Joey's experience would be sensory grounded language, like long, elongated, highlights as a result of changing something or other. That would be sensory grounded language. Ordinary descriptive language, there would be crib bars. If we could give little Joey just enough English to be able to describe in sensory grounded language what he's experiencing, he wouldn't say crib bars. Who says crib bars is theorizing. It's a good theory, but it's theory. So this brings me to a distinction I'd like to stay with for a while and work with for a while. And in doing that, I want to get back to the thing we were playing with before. What you see there, that's sensory grounded language, what you see there. Or just those lines, that's sensory grounded language. If I call it a 13 or a B, that's ordinary descriptive English. 13 or B. Ordinary descriptive English refers to seeing as, and sensory grounded language refers to just seeing. We can also talk about, and we will talk about, a distinction between hearing as and just hearing, feeling as and just feeling. But for now, let's stay with that. We could say there are two kinds of seeing. There's just seeing and seeing as. Sometimes I'm tempted to call just seeing pure seeing, but that sounds maybe a little bit too pure. As if it were some kind of ideal, but it's not an ideal, so we'll call it just seeing. Now, after going through the experience with this that we went through here last week, we no longer see that in the same way as we did before. We understand the relationship between just seeing and seeing as, which we didn't understand before. We can now see that as B. We can now see this as a B or as a 13 or as both or as just those lines without thinking that what we see is identical without thinking that what we see it as is identical with what we see. When we look at that, we can both just see it and we can see it as a 13 or as a B or whatever else we might see it as. Korzybski says that we are now conscious of abstraction in this regard. When we look at that, we're conscious of abstraction. We don't identify what we see with what we see it as. We're aware that seeing as involves abstraction. Seeing also involves abstraction. Seeing involves abstraction from the event level. But right now we're just concerned with the relation between object and label level. Well, here's another thing we can do. We can say that just seeing gives us the object level. Again, I'm tempted to say pure. And I can't think of any other term to replace it, so I'll just say pure or simple. Let's say simple. Okay, so here's a simple object level experience. When we see it as a 13 or a B, when we use ordinary descriptive English to label it as, to see it as a 13 or a B, we're doing this. Here our observation is a kind of simple observation, just seeing. Here our observation is what we might call theory-laden. You've heard the expression theory-laden observation. Now, ordinarily, without consciousness of abstraction, our observation is always already theory-laden. We're always seeing as. We're always already seeing as. After practicing with the structural differential, we're able to move between seeing and seeing as. We can, for example, we were able to see it not only as a 13 or as a B, but as someone sitting on a fence, or as 24 million served, etc. So consciousness of abstraction makes for the possibility of seeing otherwise. Seeing as means, or at least strongly suggests or implies, that one is always seeing as in the same way. Before we started playing with this, we always had to see it either as a 13 or as a B. We were sort of stuck there. with silent practice, that is directing our attention to just what we see there, we were able to see otherwise. Now, this isn't very, it's not very important and it's not very creative. It's just an example. Like we're saying, let this stand for whatever human experience. And it's not just this that we're talking about. This becomes a metaphor in the way we're using it here for whatever human experience. We're speaking more generally now about the relationship between seeing and seeing as, or hearing and hearing as. Well, what was that? That's a trick question that you can't answer. Because your neurology has already been transformed to the point that you can't answer a simple question. That you could have answered easily before beginning to attend this class. And you don't have to, I should have asked you to close your eyes first. Okay, so close your eyes. So you close your eyes. And I go like that and I ask you, what do you hear there? Right. Tequila, Tarua, Shibari. Well, you could say paper crumpling. That would be good ordinary descriptive English. Even with your eyes closed, you could probably have identified that as, you could have heard it as paper crumpling, and you wouldn't be making a mistake. To see as, to hear as, to feel as, is not to err necessarily, that is maybe. But it is, without consciousness of abstraction, it is to identify the sound which you can just hear. And you can just hear it. You have the ability to just hear that. And you also have the ability to hear it as paper crumpling. Now in this case, there's not much room for other ways of hearing it as something else. There's probably some other things you could hear it as, which would probably be erroneous. But we're not concerned here with the difference between true or false, valid or invalid, subjective or objective. We're concerned here with the difference between object level and label level. And to some extent also what you said about. Okay, let's take an example in the sense of feeling. So if I attend to feeling in my chest, in sensory grounded language, I could describe it as a chill. In ordinary descriptive English, I could call it perhaps excitement. So if when I did that, some of you felt a chill in your chest, which you may have done to some extent through your power of empathy, which you might notice here is mainly triggered by words. So the experience at the object level is actually triggered by my words. I use the word chill in the chest, and some of you actually feel it, or feel it, or it's like you somehow feel it. And if I ask you, well, what are you feeling now? If you said, I feel a chill in my chest, you were using sensory grounded language. And we would all sort of have to agree. We were sitting around sorting their toes. Hold on. But if you say, what am I feeling? It's a chill in my chest. Is it fear? Is it excitement? Is it love? Is it endeavor? Is it admiration? Is it awe? So there's a whole series of terms of varying degrees of possibly equal plausibility that we might use in ordinary descriptive English to relate to the chill in your chest. So you can see here some of the implications for self-study or self-therapy or psychotherapy are involved in making a distinction between object and label levels. And we'll have a lot more to say about that later too. This circuit can either be open, and I'm making a kind of either or contrast here, just for pedagogical purposes. This circuit can be either open or it can be closed. Okay, if the circuit is closed, or as Korzybski puts it, blocked, he uses the term semantic block. Remember that semantic for Korzybski relates to evaluation or meaning making. Can we evaluate without concepts? Yes, we can. So in that sense, we can have non-verbal meaning making. Does an amoeba evaluate when it moves towards food? Yes. Does it make meaning? Yes. Does it make verbal meaning? No. It's just a sort of aside there in terms of how we're going to use the term meaning. There'll be more on that later also. If this circuit between object and label levels is blocked, that means that we have no way of going to the object level, attending to our experience, attending to the, as much as possible, of the richness of our experience, searching for novelty in our experience, searching for aspects of our experience which have been perhaps ignored or suppressed or distorted or closed down, and therefore no way of reformulating our theories or conceptions or verbalizations about our experience. And by the same token, our experience is closed to new ways of understanding, theorizing, or formulating. So this is the main problem with the Aristotelian orientation, according to Korzybski, that it's characterized by what he calls a semantic block. And there'll be much more that I have to say about this from various angles as we go on. The identification of the label with the object, referring it that way, the identification of label object through the is's of identity and the is of predication. The identification of label with object amounts to this kind of semantic blockage or blockage to creativity, which ultimately for us is a blockage to the meaning-making capacity, that is the self-governing capacity, that is the democratic capacity of human beings. So this is the block that when I introduced the course 2 weeks ago, we're interested in exploring it. When we were talking about obstacles to democracy, I said we were concerned with just one type of obstacle to democracy in actually existing democratic regimes, and that is this semantic blockage due to what Korzybski calls the Aristotelian orientation, which shortly I'll be introducing another term for. Here's one way we could put this: that the power of established codes in the Aristotelian orientation, the power of established codes prevents, I repeat myself a little bit, reaccessing the level of sensory experience in order to make changes at the level of the code itself. And then by the same token, there's no way that new codes can change our sensory experience. So life is sort of blocked or frozen or damaged. If life is blocked, life is damaged. If life is prevented from living on, life is damaged. The object level always contains potential for many other, for hitherto unexplored modes of codification. And just the other day I found a formulation that would apply here. I've been trying to do a little bit of reading in the secondary literature on Whitehead. So there was a recent issue of Process Studies, which is a journal devoted to process thought, which is what Whitehead called his way of thinking. And the event level could equally be called the process level. The event level and the process level. So here's an article called "Reclaiming Experience" by somebody named Andrew Goffey in Process Studies, 2008. I read the whole issue of the journal. I'm constantly mining my reading for items or ideas or bits that will be useful for expanding this ever-expanding course in terms of the content I have available. It's ever contracting in terms of my ability to deliver it. So as expansion directly equals contraction. But here's how Goffey formulates it. I'm saying this so that in case any of you are tempted to look at this, don't bother. I read a whole issue of a journal and came out with this quote and one other thing that wrote down somewhere else. So if that's all I could find, you're not going to find much more there right now unless you're approaching it from some completely different angle. In other words, I'm doing your work for you, and that's part of it. That's what I'm here for. So this is how Goffey formulates in his own Whiteheadian terms, because he's never heard of Korzybski. No one has heard of Korzybski. Here's how he formulates it. We can find more in nature. What he calls nature, I would call what is going on. Because all the heavy conceptual and ideological freight that is loaded into the term nature is not present in the term like what is going on. The more we use it, the more loaded it will become. We can find more in nature than our initial experience suggests, provided we give it the attention it merits. Okay, this attention is what Korzybski calls silent practice. That is, silent practice is the practice of attention to what is going on at the silent level. The silent level is the object level because it's non-verbal. When it says silent, it means non-verbal. It's not literally silent because it also includes sound. Yes? He should have said non-verbal level, but since he calls it silent level, we'll stay with his formulation. Now, what Goffey says we find there is indeterminacy. We've been used to seeing something as something, like, for example, when we look at the sky, we've been used to seeing the sun rising and the sun setting. We look at it and we say, well, that is a sunrise. We say, the sun is now rising. Or we say, the sun is now setting. But after many, many years of close observation and thinking about what is going on there, we're not so sure about what is going on anymore. The object level becomes a level of indeterminacy. Because it's indeterminate until it is seen as something or other. Now this indeterminacy, we got back to the quotation, is the point at which new determinations arise. So we go back to the circle here and make it a circle between indeterminacy and determination. And the block means we're stuck with our existing determinations. We never enter into an area of indeterminacy, and therefore we have no way of making new determinations. So we will always see the sun as rising and setting. We'll never actually see the world turning, which is what you can actually see if you look with our modern eyes at the so-called sunrise and sunset. You can actually see that it's the Earth that is moving rather than the sun. So that's a completely new kind of seeing as, which is only made possible by first opening up this area of indeterminacy. And Goffey goes on, a transformation of habits is required. This transformation of habits is what Korzybski is looking for with neurolinguistic training, general semantics, consciousness of abstraction. A contrast in experience between our habitual modes of perception, seeing as, and the pure experience, seeing, he calls it pure, which is the word I was just trying to avoid, and the pure experience that forms the common requisite for all modes of experience. And if that's 6-week-old Joey's mode of experience, pure experience, that's what I called before innocence or beginner's mind. That's a kind of basic substratum of all subsequent modes of experience. Pure experience is indeterminate, says Goffey, as regards the way in which it might eventually be appropriated. Right? So here's the way it's appropriated. William Blake had this to say about the sun. This is where I wanted to get to. William Blake wrote, "The sun is not a hot rock." The sun is not a hot rock, said William Blake. It is a choir of angels singing, "Holy, holy, holy." That's what Blake said about the sun. Does he mean this literally? No. He's saying that we can see the sun as, we can experience it as a choir of angels singing, "Holy, holy, holy." He's operating in the realm of what is called, perhaps, poetry, or myth, or religion, or theology, or imagery. And one thing Blake was interested in was opposing the scientific reduction, kind of reduction that I was talking about before, of what is going on to what Korzybski calls the whirl of subatomic particles. So this again brings about a distinction which I find it essential to make between the event level, as Korzybski usually refers to it as the whirl of subatomic particles process going on incessantly, and all of our experience under that Scott Bezoar apparatus that I unpacked for you last time. The event level includes everything that is going on, not just what goes on at the microscopic or submicroscopic levels. So here we have we could have a scientific theory of what is going on there. The sun, our local star, known as Sol, or the sun, but we could also have mythical theories or approaches to what is going on, and Blake gives us one reading, a choir of angels singing "Holy, Holy, Holy," which is a kind of Christian reading. We know that for millennia, many of our ancestors worshipped the sun as a kind of divine being and a source of life. You might wonder what someone who's interested in science, such as Korzybski, might have had to say about William Blake's take on the sun. I was surprised to find Korzybski writing at page 219 of some edition or other of Science and Sanity, not necessarily the one you will be reading. He writes, "Many scientists, especially creative ones, like poetry. Poetry often conveys in a few sentences more of lasting values than a whole volume of scientific analysis. So Korzybski was taken by many people to be sort of crazy about science, at least in this one sentence, drops this line of appreciation for ways of apprehending or experiencing reality other than the scientific. Structural differential is recursive. It refers to itself and doesn't pretend to be a formulation of truth which is presented from outside of what is going on. Look at it this way. Up here at the highest level of abstraction, how many times have I already drawn this on the board, and how many times will I have drawn it by the time the first week of January rolls around? The structural differential is in there. General semantics is in there. So the structural differential contains a representation of itself within itself. So it refers to itself. It's self-referential. It's recursive. And also puts a date on itself there. So because it includes itself in the formulation, the map is not the territory. As it says, the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. And this map, this here is a map. It's the map that tells us the map is not the territory. This map is also not the territory. And so on ad infinitum. So Korzybski and his structural differential are in no position to line up, say, with Hitchens and Dawkins against the Christians. Various questions having to do with the relation between science and religion. It's a map of the mapping process rather than an image of the true map. The structural differential is not the one true map. So this is as far away from what some people might call objectivity as you might possibly want to get, even though Korzybski was interested in science and sanity. And here's another, if you like, ironic or semi-paradoxical feature of this scene here. You could say it's ironic or paradoxical, or at least weird, that it's only by going to the highest verbal level where we find the structural differential, and that one could avoid total domination by verbal definition. If the identification of label with object is total domination by verbal definition, it's one of Korzybski's characterizations of the Aristotelian orientation. Identification, to identify the label with the object, is to be totally dominated by verbal definition. So isn't it a little paradoxical that in order to avoid total domination by a verbal definition, we've got to go to one of the most abstract sets of verbal definitions ever formulated? That is general semantics. Korzybski puts it this way: we can't separate sharply perception from knowledge, which in a way is what he's trying to do, saying we can't separate sharply perception from knowledge except at the verbal level. So it's words that give us the ability to distinguish words from non-words. If it were possible to dwell entirely at the object level, one would be condemned to copying animals. One would never become conscious of abstraction without the services of linguistic abstraction. However, Korzybski wants to bring that abstraction down into the neurology. So it doesn't remain simply a matter of verbal knowledge. We have a very highly abstract statement about the relationship between levels of abstraction. But through neurolinguistic training, it's brought down into the object levels where we live, where we give ourselves a little pinch. It's the linguistic transform that gives human beings the capacity of consciousness of abstraction. It's because even the higher animals, the primates, more or less stop with the neurological transform that they aren't conscious of abstraction. I wonder if I should have to say something in defense of the Roman Catholic teaching of transubstantiation.
2, 4, 6, 8, time to transubstantiate.
You know that according to Roman Catholic teaching, the host is the body of Christ.
And Protestants believe it's a way.
Various Protestant and other heresies will want to say that the host is a symbol of the body of Christ. But the Roman Catholics beg to differ. It's no mere symbol of the body of Christ. It is the body of Christ. And if you can't understand this, it's because it's not comprehensible. It is a sacred mystery. That's what the Church says about it. It is a sacred mystery. Now, in terms of what I was saying before about Blake's attitude to the sun, in connection with Korzybski, the quote from Korzybski about poetry, I stand here as a conservative Jew in defense of the Roman Catholic teaching of transubstantiation. If I had to choose between the host as the body of Christ and the host as a symbol of the body of Christ, I would choose the host as the body of Christ. After all, Blake didn't say the sun is like a choir of angels singing holy, holy, holy. He said the sun is a choir of angels, holy, holy, holy. Now, there's no way I can use words to further elaborate the distinction that I'm making there in the position that I'm taking there. And Korzybski might disagree with me well about that. I don't know. Okay, now the first silent practice task. I think maybe the first year that I taught this course, I brought in a flower, a bird of paradise. Have you seen a bird of paradise? You know what it looks like? It's a beautiful flower. It's really quite a striking, wonderful flower. It's my favorite flower, and it's the one that my ex-girlfriend always used to bring to me when she wanted to initiate negotiations for repairing a rupture in our relationship. So it has that kind of connotation for me too. But a rose will do just as well. Where is that Gertrude Stein? It was Shakespeare in Romeo and Juliet, who has one of them saying, rose by any other name would smell as sweet. A rose, how did it go? Yeah. A rose by any other name. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet.
What is called a stink?
And then Gertrude Stein, I'm actually introducing your first task leader now. And then Gertrude Stein went on and on, like, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. Right? And someone wrote in a paragraph to etc., the German Semantics, a short letter addressed to Gertrude Stein. And the letter said something like this: Dear Gertrude, a rose is not a rose until it meets the mind in thought. So from the point of view of the author of this letter to Gertrude Stein, both Shakespeare and Gertrude Stein were trying to arrive at the distinction between label and object levels that is given in the structural differential. The closest they can get to it being confined at the verbal level was with verbal formulations and or tricks like a rose by any other name, Each smell is sweet, a rose is a rose is a rose. But a rose is not a rose until it meets the mind in thought. And whatever object you're going to be using for your first sound practice task, come here, Rose. Korzybski, being awfully straight, talked a lot about a pencil. I'll give you a quote from that. You could choose such a mundane object as a pencil, or you could choose a more, like when I look at a pencil, or a piece of chalk, for example, I do have some kind of bodily feeling as part of my experience of chalk. But when I look at a rose, I think my bodily feeling is somehow more vivid and more intense. But I won't be asking you to explore the bodily feeling. I'll be asking you to look, to choose an object. Let's make it a natural object rather than a pencil. Actually, let's take two objects. Let's take a natural object, that is one that has not been produced by human beings, such as a pencil. So a rose would be an example of a natural object, and a pencil would be an example of a man-made object. Carry out the same procedure with both of these objects. I'm going to tell you what it is. Korzybski somewhere puts it this way. He says, he's talking about a pencil, and he says, as you look at the pencil, you'll just see a pencil. You won't concern yourself with, here it is. Yes, in my words, Korzybski returns to his beloved pencil as an example. And I quote, our attention is restricted to its use for us. I'm saying a lot more about technologism. One of the characteristics of the Aristotelian orientation is that it focuses our attention on that which is useful to us as inhabitants of a technological world. We have a whole set of references to Heidegger here and many others. We don't interest ourselves in its smell. We don't think the pencil might have a smell or a taste, or its many other potential uses. We don't interest ourselves in the small scratches to be found on its surface, or in the different qualities of color as we look at the different color on it. And he goes on to describe all the different characteristics of the pencil which we could see if we paid attention to it at the object level, but ordinarily don't see because we restrict ourselves to its use for us. It's a pencil. It is a pencil. It's something that we use for writing checks, for filling out income tax forms, etc., etc. Pencil is a first form of a computer, I guess. And I would add, when we look at the pencil, we don't ask where it was made, and how it was made, and by whom, and how much they are paid. We don't remember, for example, that writing was invented in ancient tyrannies in order to keep tax records. So the task is, let's say we're looking at the rose. To put your attention, to focus your attention on what you see there. Hey, you can also feel it, right? Without destroying it. You can feel the petals of the rose. So just about any natural or artificial object you choose to be accessible to the senses of vision and touch. Hey, you could chew it and swallow it as well, but you probably don't have to go that far. Some things are probably best not chewed and swallowed. Whatever. Just do whatever you can do at the sensory level to give your full attention to the object that you choose. If we stay with the rose as an example, you will see the color more vividly than you ordinarily would, and variations in color on the petal. You'll notice the precise shapes of the petals and their relation to one another. You'll notice their texture and variations in texture. Perhaps little drops of moisture here and there. Perhaps little wrinkles in the pebbles. Perhaps some surprises, because the object level has a sea level later. The object level is a level of surprises. Perhaps a rot, perhaps an insect crawling around in there, perhaps a worm. Takes you back to Blake there. Blake writes of the rose, "Rose, thou art sick." He goes on to describe the worm eating away at the innards of the rose. There's a romantic image for you. So you focus your attention on the rose. You give it your attention. I'm not saying give it your love. That could be part of it. And you write a report of the experience. And in this report of your observations, you try to use as much as possible sensory grounded language. Now, that's not easy. And as a matter of fact, one of the problems of these tasks that I assign is that it's easy for a student to be distracted by the effort of using sensory grounded language, sensory grounded English, to describe the experience of the object. And paradoxically, the effort to describe the experience and report to me, it's double-edged. If you have to describe it in sensory grounded language, it encourages you to focus your attention on as many details as possible so that you can describe them. But at the same time, because the description is necessarily linguistic, it can distract you from the experience. That's why over time I've decided to instruct people to divide their task, divide their experience into two parts. First, you just look, smell, taste, feel. And maybe some things have sounds as well. And then you describe, as much as possible in sensory grounded language, what you've seen, heard, felt, etc. You can go back to observation in the course of writing a description in order to refresh your memory, right? What you've seen, heard, felt, etc. But in the first instance, you should just see, hear, feel as much as you can, as much detail as you can. Maybe give yourself, maybe prescribe a certain amount of time. 4 minutes. Maybe a minimum of 4 minutes. If it was a pencil, our lips would curl with disdain. Who would spend 4 minutes carefully examining the pencil? But you're going to be using two objects. One of them is a natural object. To spend 4 minutes paying close attention to the natural object is somehow good. To spend 4 minutes paying attention to an unnatural object is perhaps not so good. I don't know. But the reason I'm assigning both is A, so you can have two experiences rather than just one. And B, so that you can notice some interesting differences between our experience of a natural object, which is not necessarily intended for use, and a man-made object, which is almost invariably intended for use. Now, I'm also going to ask you to, so there's part 3 of the task, which is a mini essay, a paragraph or two. Okay, let's get really sparkling here. Let's say that 30% of the mark will be for the essay. 70% of the mark for the task will be for the description of the task. I can't mark your actual experience of observation because I can't observe your observation. Even if I was right there with you, I couldn't observe your observation. I can only observe what you say about it in sensory grounded language. So that's where the 70% goes. 30% would be for a mini essay. First I'll tell you what's involved here, and then I'll justify it. A paragraph or two explaining the significance, explaining the importance of this task. The explanation is directed at a naive reader. In other words, you're writing an explanation not for me, you're writing the explanation for someone who is not a member of this course. Right? You're explaining to someone who is not a member of this course why on earth you would be doing something like this in the university course, which would be reported on in a scholarly journal for the scientific study of the spirit of democratic citizenship. Now I'm going to be asking you to do this as much as possible in your tasks. It'll be more appropriate for some tasks than for others. But the result of this will be that at the end of the half year, your journal ideally could be a kind of introductory text that could serve as a kind of virtual substitute for the course for a naive reader. That would be ideal. My justification for asking you to do this, because this is really the first time that I've given the course that I've been as definite and certain of the importance of this as I am now, is that in the past it's been possible for people to take the course and do the tasks and really not get nearly as much out of the course as they would want to. So it's the effort of explanation that I'm requiring from you that will help to, again, paradoxically perhaps, help you to internalize these experiences at all levels, at the object level and at the label level, so you get a complete experience, one that is rich at the sensory level for the sound and practice tasks, and also at the label level, theorization, explanation, theorization. Now let me say a little bit more about what you're likely to run into. In a way, this task is similar to some experiences that some of you may have had with meditative practices of various kinds. Similar but also very different, because chain index, you're doing this for this course, not for the Buddha. By the way, when I held up the Bird of Paradise at the beginning of I think maybe it was the first class, first time I ever gave the course, I was alluding to the Buddha's famous flower sermon. Buddha gave many teachings, and Buddhist scriptures record probably many more teachings than the historical Buddha actually gave in person. But one of the teachings he was supposed to have given consisted entirely in coming before the assemblage of gods and goddesses and practitioners and kings and princes and beggars and mendicants, people of all kinds. He just held up a flower. That's all he did. He didn't describe it in ordinary descriptive Pali or in sensory grounded Pali. He just held up the flower. That's all. And according to the tradition, one of his followers, Kasyapa, it's funny the things you remember and the things you don't. And of course I could be remembering it wrong, and there could be someone who would correct me. One of his followers, Kasyapa, smiled. So the teaching actually consisted both of the Buddha's holding up the flower and of Kasyapa's smile. And then you get into all these Talmudic discussions of what it all means. See, what Kasyapa's smile meant. Did it mean that he understood it, or was he just remembering something pleasant from his past? So that's the label levels. What I was wanting to say there, instead of going back to the flower sermon, was that you're going to be distracted from observation by trains of thought, streams of thought. You may very well be distracted in this and in other sound practice tasks by streams of thought which are more or less relevant and more or less irrelevant to the task. So you very simply notice that you're being distracted and return your attention to the task. This 4 minutes should be 4 minutes of observation, not half a minute of observation and 3.5 minutes of distraction. So you want to make the effort to put a full 4 minutes of observation in. I think that's a kind of minimum. And return to the observation from the distractions. Now there are things to be learned from the distraction also, from what happens in the way of distraction. And in future tasks, I think I may be asking you to report on the distractions also, what they were, but not in this one. Now, somewhere or other, I have a list. I know I have. See it in my mind's eye. Requirements for tasks. Right? The first requirement is to carry it out exactly as prescribed. Okay? No individual freedom here. Carry out the task exactly as prescribed. Not an inch for creativity. Right? Just blind slavish obedience on the path to democracy. Carry out the task in the order of the steps that are prescribed and in the manner that is prescribed. So when I give a mark to the task, that's partly what I mark you for. Deportment. What else can I say about it? Well, perhaps I should say, what questions do you have? Any questions about the task? Yes.
Shall we choose 2 objects, both not manufactured by human, like both of them natural?
One natural, like a rose, and one manufactured, like a pencil.
Okay, alright.
If you like, you can choose a rose and a pencil. Those are, yeah.
How long?
How long should the report be? It's impossible to say. I just have to have different people have different capacities and inclinations, so this is a place where individual freedom and creativity are unavoidable. I would say as much as you think is necessary. This is a task that was handed in by a former student named Daniel Otis in 2006. He's now studying creative writing. This is a description of a banana. Sensory ground description of a banana. That's how long his was. It got an 83. And I wrote the comment here, excellent observation, with no discussion of your effort to notice the difference of object and label. Were there not? Well, that's irrelevant because I gave a different form of instruction there. Anyway, why don't I read you the first few lines of this to give you a sense of what an 83 was like in the past version of the course. Oh, by the way, it's good. You should tell me what it is up front. And don't make me guess from the sensory ground description what it is that you've been observing, because I won't be able to. It's very unlikely that your sensory ground description will actually let me know what it is seen as. Okay? Your description is at the level that is close to just seeing, hearing, feeling, etc. And that is unlikely to let me know, give me a basis for judgment. Anyway, task number 3, description of banana. In that year was description number 3. This year it's description number 2. The material object I perceive in front of me is predominantly of a smooth, faded yellow complexion, which is interrupted sporadically by numerous small, dark brown spots shaped as ovals and circles. Can you see it? Which cover about a third of the object's surface. Because you know it's a banana, you can see it. Because you know what it is seen as, you can just see it, as I read the description of the form. Smooth, faded yellow complexion, interrupted sporadically by numerous small dark brown spots, shaped as ovals and circles, which cover about a third of the object's surface. Okay, on closer visual inspection, Each brown spot creates a very slight indent on the relatively smooth yellow surface of the object, etc., 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 and then on for 1.5 pages. And this year I didn't require an explanatories. Okay, that was an answer to the question of how long. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just a little confused. I mean, you say essay is, I'm just a little confused. The essay is the third part. So,
The first part is to observe.
okay.
That's part of the task. Now,
Oh,
you can't put that on paper because the observation won't be on paper.
that's right.
Okay, good question. So then you describe what you observe in sensory language. So I call that the second part of the task. And it is the second part because you can't just sit down and write it without having first observed.